Hey everybody, this is Pete from the Spinner Rack, and we also have
Calvin Ellis straight from Smallville and ready to rock.
75 years ago, Smallville made its first comic book appearance in the Superboy issue, and we're celebrating that. The classic character from DC comic books, obviously offshoot, derivative of Superman, which was a big seller in its time. Um, Very successful and was around for a pretty long time up until 86. And then a little while after this 86, we got different iterations. We got one from the TV show that came out. We had the alternate one that was a clone of him that was a mainstay for a little while. We've had a couple other Superboys after that. We've had, the Secret Origin had done something. We had Superboy's Legion, alternate universe version. And I think they have some Dawn of DC Superboy stuff going on now. But I don't know if that was Connell or not. But there's so much
No,
Superboy stuff.
well,
Huh?
Connell is still around, and John Kent, Superman's son, was Superboy for a hot minute, and then they
Uh-oh.
decided they wanted to make him Superman. They totally nuked the fridge on that one. But uh, for me, I'm a very big proponent of Superboy because I've always felt that Superboy gives Superman an actual childhood, which is what they did. And when they took him away, then he didn't really have that any longer. But we got a lot of great development and also a lot of great stories and characters that came out of the Superboy series. Superboy is significant in the fact that he is the last surviving Golden Age character created. Okay, he was the last. After him, all the rest of them went to the wayside, and other characters like Green Arrow, Aquaman, there's one of those I can't remember right now. But certain these guys who are mainstays today, they survived because they were in backup stories in issues of Superboy. And so, really important. I mean, the importance of the character can't be, understated. And yes, derivative, but this is an idea that came from Jerry Siegel as early as 1939. The only reason why he wasn't published is because DC declined. They then brought it to them again, 1941. They declined once again, and then while he was overseas serving in the war, they decided, hey, you know what, we want to do it, and they did it without his permission. But everything from the Phantom Zone to the Phantom Zone criminals, Crypto, Bizarro, certain types of kryptonite, a whole bunch of Kryptonian elements. All of this stuff, came out of those Superboy stories. But even more significant is Smallville, and we have the 10-year series entitled Smallville, which really adapts a lot of those Superboy stories. The whole thing with the red and blue blur, that's the red and blue blur. Sorry, tripping over my own tongue. Red and blue blur comes out of those Superboy stories, which a lot of people didn't realize. So, even though I mean they wanted to put Superboy to bed, but they still wanted to use a lot of the stuff that worked, which keeping the Kents alive. They went back to the origins of Smallville, where it was a farm instead of a general store, and we want to keep certain characters and to try to keep those human connections that he would make, even though they totally ruined like character like Pete Ross at the end of the day. But this was something that gave Superman significant development, and still a lot of there's still a lot of great stuff that hangs around. Well, let me not say hangs around, but is in use and in play to this day.
Well, one of the things that which I think DC kind of lost when they were doing Superboy, is that it wasn't definitely tied in continuity. They at times have tried to figure it out because they've had obviously Action Comic books, and I think it's like, I don't know, Superman 50 something, where they did the origin again, which were clearly storylines that came later later to say this is Superman's origin, and then Superboy comes a little bit later, and it comes with a fresh young person's thing of having him as a boy in basic Smallville and doing fun stories that were extremely successful at the time. But then at the same time, the continuity part, which was more Marvel's thing, not DC's thing, they would kind of try to do it and they try to connect things. But it's like, this is a different time. and it might not even wholly connect, because that's what the Silver Age is like. We're gonna do stories, or DC would do. We'll just do stories that don't connect, and you could have Superman that might not have this thing where because everyone I think liked that first time they did the full origin story, because that was a mainstay for a while. But then while they were going further, they were like, well, how do we make sense of this? Why are the Kents so old early on? Let's do a story where we make them young. And it's like, okay, now we got to figure out how do we get that poignant moment where they tell them to go, but we also need them to be old again. So they're gonna go and they have this whole real heavy story where they get sick and all this stuff, and then they have the same moment, but it's like you added a lot of stuff to it when basically you're just supposed to have fun with these stories. And I think the DC of the '60s kind of got into the weird part where they were just like, let's just do stories where we don't try to make sense of the continuity, because there's things we can go to and say, hey, here's Supergirl pops up, and he says, oh, he don't know who Supergirl is, but he's met Supergirl at Superboy. That's like, you're not supposed to worry about the continuity of things. You're just supposed to move forward and say, this is just fun stories of Superman as a boy, and not kill yourself with it. That's the Silver Age. That's what DC's doing, and I'm pretty sure Mark Wexler was not killing himself for origin. You see later where they try to say, all right, now we don't like the fact that all of the Kryptonians can fly. Since they should have flown by themselves, let's fix this. So basically, you got this young stories. And as anything, I don't know if it was because of, it being bi-monthly that it kind of slowed down for the character, but definitely a mainstay and a character that's always come back and that people like. So, and I think it was kind of harder to keep doing Legion stories in Smallville. So you see the Legion Superboy moved to the Legion's area, so we get less time in Smallville. So it made Smallville a little more important when you got that. But then I think you could see in the Byrne run, even though they didn't want, the public was kind of like, don't make this into your, him running home. Where so Byrne couldn't really do that, but we got Marv Wolfman do stories like that, and we definitely got, which was the story that people love the most, which is Superman for All Seasons, where they kind of turned Smallville into his fortress of solitude, where he goes back and he has some struggles, and then he can come back to it. That's one visually is possibly the strongest, but I don't know that you're just supposed to have fun with this stuff, because it got kind of wacky with some of the shooter stories that go in. There's gangsters and Legion and all this other stuff, but it's fun stuff. So it's a great 75 years of Smallville. I will say they kind of, in this article, they kind of try to go to, hey, the Siegel wanted to do Superboy who's a prankster. And and then they did Funny Man or something like that, who was a prankster. So that's what they would kind of do. It's like, but Jerry Siegel wrote the origin of Superboy. It's like, then why do we always have to point out that they wanted a loose affair with what's the name? They did the origin story of him. It came up with the character. They always want to try to take it a peg and say the editorial, excuse me, kind of they had it. They had it. They had the idea, and we don't know if they had went that route, whether it would be having him be straight laced as he's been, even though Superboy would kind of have things where he would like a kid think that, oh, it's my fault, like when his parents almost dies, like when his parents die, he feels it's his fault because the trip he sent them to, and then this radiation, and I think who's it, Lex Luthor can't cure him or something like that. But you're just supposed to have fun with this stuff and not kill yourself and try to do the story where they've always done. Superboy leaves, goodbye. Now you're in what's the name? Clark Kent and what's the name? You're not supposed to do any of that stuff. You're just supposed to have fun and not kill yourself with the continuity. But anyway, any other thoughts?
Well, I thought they did it. The only thing I remember from Wessinger was because one of the things that he was trying to determine, he was like, all right, so we got Superman, we got Superboy. He's like, is this the same character? Because he was looking at him like, this is almost like a totally different character when you look at it. So he's like, no, this is the same character, and then eventually you would get the whole Earth One, Earth Two thing. So that would explain some of the Golden Age stuff. The continuity, I mean, but the continuity was always an issue because ah, I, I don't disagree with having fun with it, but they rocked with it for such a long period of time, and they were never really able to. They never really got that to jive. These were the adventures of Superman when he was a boy, and if you take all of those adventures, it was like it's almost like it was a totally different person, especially in the Golden Age. Things got a little bit. They tried to get more of a flow. I don't think they ever really got it, but I mean, at one point, Superboy, they put him in Superman Family. And when they put him in Superman Family, the sales increased. And there was like a whole big fanfare when he joined Superman Family, to the point you would have thought, like, well, hey, because you already had Superman, Supergirl, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen was there, all the books that got canceled because of the DC implosion. And they actually put him there to give him a boost, to give the Superman Family book a boost at the end of the day. And, he was never canceled. It was never that the character wasn't popular or that the sales were so bad we got to get rid of him. It was, again, Crisis was just like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. And he just literally got ushered off the stage. Unfortunately, because he was in a bad situation where he was supposed to be a double book with him and Supergirl. And they said, okay, so we're going to kill off Supergirl. And they don't want to do Superboy anymore. So that pretty much is just like, all right, well, that's your run, buddy. It was nice while it lasted.
Well, that's the thing. When the New Adventures, that's when the sales. Even though I was checking that book out as a kid. That's where the sales kind of was dipping, and Supergirl was also.
Oh,
dipping.
I almost forgot. Is New Adventures of Superman where they decided that Smallville was going to be always like 20 years behind wherever Superman was? And so that was how they were going to explain why the cars in Smallville still look like they were in the 1930s or something?
No. I think they weren't. I think they'd already established. I think in I forget. I don't know if it was Superman or Superman. They kind of set up the so-called Marvel time before that. That hey, don't kill yourselves. These things, time is moving along. We hope you play along with it. So even though obviously any small town country kind of looks old fashioned, I think it kind of went to the artist. But I think the 7-year rule might have been they might have set that up in Superboy, but I could be wrong. It could have been in Superman, but I think
And those early Golden Age Superboy stories, there weren't even any villains. There weren't even any villains in the story. It was just him hanging out with these kids.
yeah.
Whoever the kids in Smalviille was, they would like have whatever trouble or whatever escapades they would get into, and the book sold. There were no villains. There were no crooks. There were nothing. It was just like scamps doing all this other type of stuff. I don't think we saw until the Silver Age. I don't believe there were any legitimate villains, actual villains until that time. So it's a testament to how popular the character was, how much kids liked him.
Well, this thing when you get to I guess it's 84, which is well before Crisis. Even though the DC had the history of the DC universe, which was they were trying to do. That's when they were trying to do the Power Man and Iron Fist, where they're like, we're gonna have a dual book where we take these stories of the leftover stories from Paul Kupperberg, that he was doing both of those things, and I don't think I checked out the Supergirl at that time, but it was trying to do the Power Man and Iron Fist to save both of them, and then at some point they were just like shelved, and then they try to say, well, Crisis, we'll try to figure out what happens with Crisis, but it's like those stories were on the shelf, and Kupperberg was doing other Superman stories after that while they weren't going anywhere. So it was kind of for sales, and then they kind of forgot. And that happens a lot at DC. DC had a lot of characters which, were remembered great to this day. But I think I was arguing, this is going to a different topic of saying like the Doom Patrol, where they're like how great it was. You see the death of the Doom Patrol, and then the Titans kind of connected to that story where we saw the death. And this is the story that happened right after it. It's like, no, read the book. It says at the end, like, hey, you write in write in and did they actually get killed? They were asking the fans to write, and there was no fans there. And that's not to say this. Obviously, Superboy had fans. It's just connecting to say that sometimes the sales kind of dipped, and there was so many characters that they had for Superman that was selling, like not just Superboy, but Jimmy, Lois, Supergirl from time to time when they had a title before this. So you had a lot of success, and of course with the times and the Superman titles kind of waning down, they were kind of downsized, and they downsized to kind of three titles. And I think Superman family was kind of gone, but the character itself, because I was still reading it at that, well, as long as it was out, I was still reading it, and it was kind of one of the books that until it came all Marvel. But sometimes books just kind of go through that, and you can't really explain why this or that, or reasons why it would kind of go. 'Cause same with Superman, you had the top kind of titles, top creators on the character. You had Marv and Gil Kane and Keith Giffen doing stories, and you had a multitude of creators on what's that thing on DC Presents, but the sales were still kind of going down. So one of the things that you can't really, they talk about the all flash. We had so many successful books, and at some point, you know, Wonder Woman had two titles. She went down to one. It's just what kind of happens with comic books over time. And
Yeah.
DC kind of retooled everything all the time too. Batman retooled a bunch of times. Superman had updated his origin a couple times. So, yeah, this is the new one. Oh, the secret years. Here's the new one where, okay, that sort of thing, which is, what ultimately happens with these characters.
I still have. Well, I'm still been planning to get all of them signed by Frank Miller eventually. But
Oh, those
uh
you can get those ones signed by Frank Miller if you can.
well, yeah, he did the cover art. He did the
Yeah,
cover art
yeah,
of all
yeah.
of them. So that's still a goal of mine eventually. But I thought those were good books in terms of like because I don't buy into a lot of fan argument about well, what did he do and this that and the other and how come people didn't realize that he was this and he was oh my gosh shut up okay most of the stuff is clearly said. You just like where you came into this particular character. You came in '86 and you like everything that happened with the reboot. That's fair and fine. Nobody's telling you you have to dislike it, but the idea that it only worked that way is ridiculous when you see that it worked the other way for over 40 years. Okay, can it make work more than one way? Sure. Okay, but no, your way is the way that you like is necessarily the better way in the story. So when they did the secret years, I was like, okay. And it's see, it's tough because I'm somebody who read Secret Years, Superboy, the even with stuff like the Untold Legend of the Batman. I read a whole bunch of this stuff, which gave me a very good understanding of the characters at that time. And then so then when you get Crisis and they do the stuff over, I'm like, okay, I get that you wanted to do very much less with Batman because Batman didn't have the mythology that like the Superman did. To be quite honest, Batman didn't even. I mean, even the Legend stuff wasn't as deep as you would go with when you look at the Superman stuff. At least not at that time. So you go and you're like, all right, you're doing this over. And I understood that they were starting over, but then, the other stuff I looked at was like, yeah, it was very hard to compare it because that was a friction of 40 plus years of work, and this is very new, and it just like I was like, this is not clicking. This is not clicking for me. Doesn't mean one was better than it doesn't mean one was better than the other. You may care for one better than the other. But that's a pet peeve of mine with the guys who came in '86. Like, no, Superman was stupid until 1986. Now he's great. I'm like, you didn't read the stuff before then. It was like it was like this guy was over here selling all of these books. But anyway, before I get on that particular train, 75 years ago, Smallville, great amount of stuff that comes over. Even the title of the much. Well, I thought some of those episodes were hella bad, but the Smallville TV series that was very much loved by a lot of people, got 10 seasons out of it. All of it attributed to this particular character, his creation, and then the creation of what would be his stomping grounds until of course he gets older.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, it just there have been I guess moments where we felt like they were gonna get him back with Jeff Johns. So, but at the same time, the character's going through so many periods, so it's like I can't
well, that's
really. I can't
Secret
really
Origin.
say like he was going, totally gone or that that sort of thing. It's like I think it's emotionally and struggle and that sort of thing is saying he's gone, but at the same time, at some point, then he was back. But then it's like they didn't do too much with him after that. So it's, and DC, that's the thing. When you look at stuff like the Secret, there was a Secret or the Superman and the Untold thing. Like the way they're working is like your gold, like the Batman one, basically everything that happened to him in his entire thing, which we would normally try to say was the golden age, actually was stuff he experienced, just not the way we initially thought. And when they kind of streamlined it, and then when they did, Roy Thomas did the Golden Age Batman, his thing was softer than the original. Batman doesn't, he doesn't even get in the way of punching the guy down there. The guy slips out of there and he says a fitting end for his kind. So like the golden age that we think, like the Earth 2 kind of stuff, the way the DC creators did it, they might have left the idea that the golden star, well, the daily star was, I'm sorry I said golden, the daily star was the Earth One, but at the same time, the way they go through the history, it's like, oh, Laurie Moranis was part of this thing and the secret thing, and this was a part of it already, and all the basic stuff from what's the name? What? Oh, the only difference was that it was Jor-El with just no EL. That's the only difference with the DC. Like they're not killing themselves over this Earth Two until they get to, Crisis, which is kind of, I think all the creators were like, the DC universe's continuity doesn't make any sense. So we're finally going to fix it. And, and then now the other problem is, I'm going to say, this is not Superboy. We're going to end. I'm sorry, we're not going to keep going on too long. But I see online where they're just like, all they needed to do was do a new Justice Society, not do what's the name where you kill out those characters. It's like, all right, you understand that there's Alan Moore coming in, permanent change was happening, that sort of stuff was going on, and this seemed like permanent change and a demarcation for fans to come back. Having DC, which they had been doing it, they had the new DC, they were doing titles, and some were initially successful, and some were had some energy, and they had a lot of buzz going on, a lot of creativity. The numbers wasn't matching Marvel. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna do what it takes to match Marvel, and that's what they try to do. And you
Yep.
can't get past
They
that.
did they did the Daffy Duck. They did the Daffy Duck episode. They're like, okay, I'm gonna do this, and I blew myself up. It's great, but you can only do it once. You can only do it once at the end of the day. That the origin that Jeff Johns did, Superman Secret Origin, that is still his official origin. That hasn't changed because every time I look, they've done some tweaking here and there, but that is still the standard origin. But I mean, you were there with me at the last convention. I saw Jeff Johns and I ran up on him. I was like, yeah, love what you did. What's wrong? Why do these guys? Why what is up with DC when it comes to Superboy? He could only shrug his shoulders, and that was it. They don't know what to do with. They do not know what to do with the character. They know how to fight a lawsuit to make sure that they don't lose them, but they don't know how to use them in actual stories. But I was reading something the other day, and I was like, oh, I guess the Jeff Johns origin is still intact. But to answer the question, whether or not Superman had a career as Superboy, they don't know. And the other problem, it does go to what you said. They're not very good when it comes to this continuity stuff. And it's not just that they're not good at it. They don't want to do it. They don't want to do the work on that. I think most of these guys think about Superman having a career as Superboy, and they think because they're like, oh my goodness, it's already enough work with him as an adult. It's nice just to have him as a kid, and he's just over here learning some life lessons, and that'll be the end of it. He actually was doing stuff, well, and this got to match up with the future. You can just see these guys. They after they, you throw the water on them or get the smelling salts. They wake up and then it's like they think about it. They go back and they say it again. I did. I'll probably do this in some writing, but I noticed that as much as they wanted to put the character to bed, and they still wanted to keep the name viable, so they had Kal-El. Superman and Kal-El just keep popping back up. They can't put that character to bed officially for
for various reasons. But
Mhm.
you would think by now they know how to use them, but they still just don't.
Yeah, I mean, the thing, I think also it's, all right, to be honest, it's going to be harder, not necessarily because there was enough, in a sense, for Byrne, because Byrne had a number of things that he also was a fan of. Obviously, you can see in the Bizarro story, it's basically the same story as the original one, going back to how, having a finite ending to the
Yeah,
kind of.
pretty much.
Mhm. So when you look at it, you look at it at the same time, but there's a lot of history that he, could draw upon. He said they told him, "Hey, we need Superman and Superboy intact," and then he said, "All right, I'll do some Superboy stuff, that sort of thing." But when you look at other people who had done so much great ground, which I'm saying as far as success, with Jeff Loeb going and saying this is the Superman Fortress of Solitude, having all these great scenes
Mhm.
there. Then you say, well, you could. This guy should be doing. He got all this character. Maybe we should get. I'm sorry. The truth to say, 30 issues of a Jeff Loeb and whoever, any credit creator would work with them, or a Jeff Johns saying, hey, we established this back. Let's get 30 issues of him, because that's what I think leads you to your success of having at least three or two and a half. Well, I think it has to be three. Three solidifies your thing. At least in the 80s, that would do that. A lot of times editors lost it, but having those two guys kind of do it, and since they kind of set up that, this is, they want to go to the Americana with the Superman movie played to, you have creators that want them to go back home, see what you could do in that time and have sort of more fun stories type of deal. Even though, because they kind of did the same thing at points in the new one where Superboy would have some Kryptonians that say, "Oh, this is my real parents." It would go through the same stuff you go in the what's the name, that have all this heavy drama that Superboy goes through, and then it kind of resolves later. You have these new guys who are kind of trying to take what was in the film, because Byrne is taking that too. Take what's in the film in that first thing and try to and do not what they did in say Smallville, the TV show, because that's kind of having the heavy drama with the Smallville backdrop of the what's like the what's that show? I don't want to wait. That sort of those dramas, the dramas that were out at that time. But so when you get to
One Tree Hill.
not that's not One
Oh
Tree.
no, no. Oh, that's right. Dawson's Creek. Dawson's
Dustin,
Creek.
thank
Dawson's
you.
Creek.
You went too far. That was wrong with you. But having that kind of heavy drama, like having him, like having a couple girls chasing around him, and then we're not going to get into the whole sexcapades of the Smallville show, but luckily the actor who played Superman, Clark Kent, did not go through any of that stuff. But anyway, getting this, you have a couple creators, instead of just laying some groundwork and saying, "Hey, look, just look at these," getting into all this great characterization you could do, getting and having those stories, and maybe not the Pete Ross that's in the what's the name for all season, because he gets kind of douchey in there, complaining about, oh, Clark doesn't come around here anymore. And I'm like, good Lord, he's visited. You see him here, like. But yeah, I just think that
Well,
maybe those guys who kind of used the backdrop of of what was in the movie, which kind of said this stuff really, not saying it didn't work, but they said this could be really Americana, like play. And I guess obviously Smallville the show played to it. Have these guys spend a couple years in there, like, or whoever else is a new creator to do that, and try to cultivate stories where you kind of do the same thing they did for Gotham. Because in Gotham, they created a bunch of different cops in the town. Someone remembered that you had Lucius Fox in there. Said, "Why is this guy not here? Let's deal with him." Like, flesh out the town, and then you can do some more stuff in it. That sort of thing, and not just have the immediate. What's the name did? Sorry, I'm going with having Luthor, the guy who's been having the bad childhood. Arg! Sorry, you
I
go.
think what
no, I think what they did, Superman for all seasons. I thought what I always established with it is that a lot of guys, I mean, they really like the story. They really like the story. I was, I always said that that was a good Superman story, but that would have been an excellent Superboy story. And that's what you ended up missing. That's what you ended up missing out on. Because at one point I was like, he's a little old for this, isn't he? Where, he goes to the town, he goes to Metropolis, does stuff, and he goes back home. I was like, it's not that bad, dude. It's really not. But
Yeah,
that
yeah,
would have
I
been
agree.
that would have been an excellent Superboy story where he's like, you know what, I could use some reassurance. I could, go back home for a little bit. He's still young enough. But the whole idea was that they wanted to humanize Superman, and by humanizing him, they wanted to give him doubt, make him uncertain about this type of stuff. And so they would go back. I was like, yeah, but he should have gotten through a lot of that stuff as a kid. At this point, you're saying he's a man. You're saying he's a grown man. So, you know, and that Superman story, a Superman for all seasons, that was because it was so well received. That was the template for a lot of stories going forward. When Clark coming, to Metropolis or going, to wherever, a lot of times in Metropolis, and that was told so many different ways, almost like the Dark Knight Returns. And I would stretch, and I was like, he's a little old for this story, but it's a perfectly good and would be an excellent Superman story. I mean, Superboy story at the end of the day. So those are some things, I was like, well, you lost that when you lost the character. And a lot of that human stuff that you want to show and the doubt and everything, that works very well for him as a boy. It works very well for him as a boy, but as a man, he's really got to be. I mean, one of the things that I noted once they did that is that Superman always needs help. He's got to go to Batman, he's got to go to Wonder Woman, he's got to go to all these other people. He's not a scientist anymore. He's got to go to Neil Hamilton. And the character before 1986 was very self-sufficient. He was able to do a lot of this stuff on his own, but the whole idea in humanizing him was, hey, we want to show that he's, like a human being. He's got friends, but he also has doubts. He needs help. He can't do everything on his own. And I'm like, well, then it kind of doesn't suit the purpose of being Superman. He's just like a really nice guy, and he's very powerful. There's some other stuff that's supposed to be intrinsic to the character as well. But those are things you could have established with Superboy if that's where you were going with it, because the character did lend himself to a bunch of that stuff. So again, missed the boat on that one, but it worked.
Well, wait a
They
second.
didn't.
Wait, that's the thing. I can't. The hard part is that that's what we couldn't get. That's what we really couldn't get with the Burn stuff. We couldn't have him go back and cry to the parents because the people were watching for it. And then it's, as quick as he could, Marv Wolfman at the same time is like, the Superman getting his hat handed to him. It's like, I gotta go back home. And like, son, yes, I got it. I can go back. And he beats up the Fearsome Five. And I felt the same with the Superman all seasons, where it was kind of like, there's nothing you could have done here with this situation. This is obviously Luthor setting it up. And he's like, why don't you just go somewhere? And, and it's like, yo, no. The guy set it all up. God, you're
Yeah,
like, what is going on here? It's like, great
they
art,
made
bro.
him. I mean, I understand if they want to show him being a bit vulnerable in that moment, but you made him emotionally fragile,
Yeah.
and that's not necessarily the best thing. But they kept it there. Where I think there was some book I was reading what was like they wanted to reinterpret some stuff, and Black Lightning said something to Superman, and he gets this look on his face like he's getting ready to cry. If you say something, and if you say the wrong thing to Superman, where it's like, hey, the last time anybody cared about you was when you were dead, he gets this look on his face like he's like hurt, and I'm like, you can't be that. I said that's not making him human. That's making him fragile. So you got that's where, but that comes out of that particular story, where
Yeah.
that's where he's supposed to be. He's supposed to be this guy with this really big heart, and he's got his heart on his sleeve, and all this other type of stuff. And I'm like, maybe for another character that works long term, I don't know how well that works, for Superman, especially like when you said, hey, the Bronze Age Superman would have been like, Luthor, I know you're behind this. I'm going to sort it out, and then I'm going to take you down. That's what he would have done. He would have never been like, I need to go back. Well, not that he could have done it, but he would have been never like, I'm going back home. I need to like recuperate, think about some stuff. He may have gone to the fortress to say, hey, how do I get him this time?
Well,
But the other portion wouldn't have happened.
that's the one thing that I think, I don't know, because it's also tough when you mention that for having someone like Marv who has been in the mainstay before more than any of them, and have to do him wanting to do the golden age Superman and his kind of storytelling, when that was basically it. Like the whole moment where you see outside of Superman kind of getting outsmarted in the movie by Lex Luthor, by the lead thing, but it's obviously he doesn't know that it's going to be kryptonite, so it makes sense that he got tricked in this situation. But Superman, and when he meets Lex Luthor, it's like, you diseased. He's just like Luthor with he's in his lair. He thinks he's the best. He said, how smart I am. And Superman is not impressed at all. He's just like, you are just nuts. Like, you are totally crazy. And I mean, the take is, whereas people look at it and they've gone to that Luthor's brains and Superman is brawn, when it shouldn't. It should be, basically he's underestimating Superman in so many cases, which is, the better way to handle it, instead of saying, well, and that's how they take it to Batman too. Whereas that's the thing. I wanted to know we're going too long. There's Blackest Night. There's a moment, no, not in Blackest Night, but it's because Green Arrow passes in Blackest Night. And then in Green Arrow, the first issue, they start at Blackest Night where Superman has losing his powers, and he's like he's on top of a building with Batman, like some girl, like, I'm cold. Is this what's like? And I'm talking to a friend of mine because he was like, he was really, big Kevin Smith fan, and I was doing those gags with him. I was like, come on, man. Like, this is the thing. We've had, I always go to Superman 19 where he keeps losing powers, but he keeps out there trying to do something until there's nothing else he can do. He has to keep trying to save the day, but at some point he gets this big monster and he got no powers. Like, this guy isn't going to sit around here like he said, you got a stole, Batman. Can I borrow your cow? Like, what are you doing, Kevin Smith? Get out of here with that nonsense. Like, we don't need the scene where Superman is struggling with it, having, feeling the cold. Like, someone like that, and Batman kind of being stern. Like, get out
That's
of
how.
here.
But again, that stems from out of that. He's like, oh look, I don't want to write the powerful Superman. I want to write Superman who doesn't have any powers, and then show how tough he is, and show how this, that, and the other at the end of the day. And you don't do that. It doesn't. It comes across like, well, dude, if you're cold, put on like your thermals or something of that nature. But other than that,
What you're really saying is that in this story, we got to take Superman out because he doesn't have any powers. Because without his powers, he's no damn good. And there's been, since the Golden Age, you've had too many stories showing that he's just as capable. He's just as capable without. He's not like some fish out of water if he loses his powers or anything of that nature. So, but that's the approach too many of them come, because there too many writers come to with Superman, because they don't really understand the character. And it also comes because time back to the original position I was making, or rather point, because we don't have that childhood in Smallville. So a lot of these guys are piecing this stuff together, but they're piecing it together for a grown man. And a grown man, like, no, a grown man's not, he's supposed to be a bit more balanced than a lot of the ways that these guys would like to show him. And, they want to show, this is the reaction that they would get from him sometimes. This is the reaction you would get from a young man or a teenager, who's been told this, like, come on, we all went to school. I mean, please, we went to, I won't drop the name of the junior high school, but when we went to junior high school, if somebody said something like that, and, and you are, oh, please, that was almost like prison. You couldn't show any weakness. You had to be tough. So the idea of somebody coming over saying something to you and you reacting like that, or somebody, it just comes across as almost like arrested development. But those are things that you could have addressed with him as a young man, okay, or as a boy, or as a teenager, and they decided that that was too much of a lift. It was too much of a lift in terms of continuity, and it's still too much of a lift for them. And I guess it'll stay that way until you have somebody like myself who has some good ideas and really just wants to work with that aspect of the character. Until then, you just get guys making excuses. And the other thing, I'm like, if you get somebody to work on it and it works and it's hot, and all of a sudden the sales are good, everybody like, yeah, see, this is great. Why did they stop it? Why did it stop it over here? So, I'm on record right over here for all you guys who've said this nonsense since '86. All it takes is one successful run, and that'll be the end of it. But
75 years and counting. 75 years and counting. So, all due respect to Superboy, you brought in a lot, okay, and we're still benefiting from it. And the seat is still ready for you. Nobody's taking that spot. You'll be back there eventually. That's my hope. That I know.
All right, Spinner Rack
We're out.
out.